welcome you both here to our figuring out a technology as it's an advantage for us also. We're putting together this nice LTAD chat because so many people out there who have listened to a lot of what we're talking about really don't know a lot of the history and the background. And then there's nobody that knows the history and the background of what's gone on in physical education, in athletics, in human performance, in long-term athletic development, physical literacy than you two. So you're the perfect pair to be on here with us to actually describe where you've come from, what you've seen, and then where you see us going. So I think we'll start with just a quick introduction of yourself and what you've done coming up through the ranks through the years, because that's a great story too. And I think the best thing that both of you present actually are the stories. Like, how do you actually make it real? You know, we have all the concepts and all of that, but how do you really bring it home and share it with people so they get a good understanding? And both of you do a great job with that. So let's see, should we go by location geographically? Start with Pat all the way out there on the West Coast.
All right, California. Well, I was not a great athlete, I think, growing up. I found myself in high school and I got a coach that asked me what I wanted to do. And I said I wanted to play football. And he said, you need to get in a weight room, which was kind of unusual in the 60s because they were trying to drive people away from weight rooms in the 60s. We didn't have much of a weight room. There was one bench press. When we squatted, two guys picked up a bar and you got under it and you squatted, and then two guys took that bar and put it down on the floor. We had no bumper plates, so it doesn't come out to the 70s. So I did that, and by the time I got to be a senior, we probably had 28 guys playing, and I would say probably 20 or more of them squatted over 400 pounds and bench press over 3. We were mostly powerlifting oriented, but we did a lot of pulls because we had to pull the bar up off the ground. And then I was one of the lucky people in 1968 to have knee surgery. I didn't know anybody that had knee surgery in 1968. As I got, going into college, I understood what happened in the 60s, the Klein study and stuff, and how that changed. But, in 68, there was just nobody. By 75, it's a badge of honor, to have a knee scar, and I used to wonder how that happened. And when in 1968, cartilage surgery was pretty much the end of your career. It was for me. And so when I decided when I was about 15 that I wanted to teach and coach, just one of those brain things that happened sitting in a classroom at looking outside, asking myself if I wanted to teach in a tie and long pants or teach in a t-shirt and shorts and be outside. That was not very tough to make that decision. But I went to school and with my idea of coaching, I actually started coaching in spring football at my high school. And then my idea was that if I was going to go do this, I was going to make sure that no athlete had what happened to me. I wanted them to be able to go beyond. So I started looking at strength conditioning. When I rehabbed my knee, I didn't get a physical therapist. I went and talked to a bodybuilder, went to a gym. Vic Tanny is $30 for the summer. And then I got into that. And I think that's probably what saved me, just being able to lift weights, because once football was over and I wasn't playing, I had to get into something. So I went through college and did that. And then I started, coaching when I did my student teaching at my old high school. And I was running a weight program. And I've never had a problem with my strength conditioning coach because I was always my strength conditioning coach. So as I advanced towards about 75, I started looking at the Olympic list because I was reading a track guy from Russia, and he called it speed strength. And I thought that was a very interesting term in terms of explosive athletics, but how do you get there? So I started looking into Russian literature and learned how to do that kind of stuff, changed our strength program more towards the Olympic style lifting by the mid 70s to 80s. Got involved with weightlifting, continued to do that stuff. And then in physical education, one day the lady I taught with, I taught with her for a long time. And by that time I was coaching at the college level. And she said, you need to start weightlifting with young kids. And I said, why? And she said, because these kids are getting things for Christmas for weightlifting and they don't know what they're doing. So somewhere around the early mid 80s, we developed a strength program. We put weightlifting into our PE program. And believe it or not, at that time, we were still had boys and girls PE. We had them separated. So on the days that I would do strength training with the girls, she would take my boys team and my boys class and go do soccer or something. And then I would take the girls and teach them how to do weightlifting. And then we were into a lot of circuit stuff and things like that. We got a grant and we bought a what they're called fitness courses or fitness courts. So we got a grant and we got a fitness court. So it was in a kind of contained area. And then we started throwing weight barbells in there and teaching them cleans and squats, and everything was repetition, not a lot of stuff. We wanted them to do it right. Then we started an after school program so that the kids could do that there too. And then as we went through, I was still a football coach in that time, and I was still looking at the idea of, I want to go to this big time place. And a friend of mine sat me down and said, you need to read this book. It was by Frosty Westring, and said, it makes the big time where you are. So I thought about that and I stopped coaching football and I decided that I was going to make my PE program the best that I could make it. So we started looking at kids as they came in and tested them, and we were testing them every quarter. We weren't just doing the fitness testing, which was like the sit up, that modified sit up over the fitness gram thing. We added the 300-yard shuttle, the 5-10-5, medicine ball throws, things like that, so that the kids were getting some kind of another variation. But at the same time, we could look at where they are, and what they were doing was going to be what they were going to do in school. When they played sports, we were just doing more or less intramurals, but we were trying to get them ready to go to high school. And again, as a middle school teacher at that time, I was coaching at the college. So I was literally looking at both ends of the spectrum. So I could see the college kids coming in that had come from bad PE programs, and they just had horrible movement. In 1977, I was talking to the defensive back coach of San Diego State during spring football, and he's teaching them how to backpedal and turn to the right, and then how to backpedal and turn to the left. And I asked him, I said, well, why are you doing that? These are college athletes. He said, because a lot of them come in here, they don't know how. They can turn one way, but they can't turn the other way. They're just good enough athletes that they can be here. And when you look at things right now, I mean, we've talked many times. There was a guy that played for he played for the Patriots, the Broncos, and the Rams. Really good defensive back. When he was with the Patriots, the funny thing was about him is whenever a receiver moved one way, he would turn with him and go. But if the receiver went the other way, he would turn all the way around. Well, if you're throwing the out, that guy's beat right now. So I had the feeling that maybe he didn't stay with the Patriots and he went somewhere else because they didn't like him, and then somebody else didn't like him. But everybody thinks he's a great athlete. But we look at things in professional sports, play an RG3, and you look at the way he did a standing long jump, and you realize that he's just a disaster waiting to happen. Because of the way he valgused his knees when he went to squat down to jump and when he jumped. And you look at some of the things in PE and you look at so many things we've changed. I have a copy of the 1946 Army fitness test. And they did squat thrusts, which is a burpee. They did squat jumps, deep knee bends, all this stuff. And then it came down to the 60s with the Klein study, and then we stopped all that stuff. And I grew up in those La Sierra type PE programs, and I still had a knee injury, but then they went away. And so when I decided to make the change and I went to middle school, I had an opportunity to just do whatever I wanted. So I created somewhat of a La Sierra middle school PE program just on my own, and that started disappearing by 1970, 72. However, there is a school up in Northern California, I believe, a middle school that still uses that program. So that's kind of interesting. But then I just looked at the whole thing, and I started coaching kids that were coming in the 7th grade and lifting weights, not only at my school, but I started coaching other kids. Greg Scouten's parents came and talked to me one night when I was doing the weight pro at the college. Said his dad said, I got this kid, he's 14. Yeah, he was 14. He weighed about 110 pounds. He wanted to be a high school football player. So we built him up to a grand total of about 123. But even at 123 in his first weightlifting meet, he was outlifting as a freshman. He was outlifting high school players that weighed 50 and 60 pounds more than him. And we laughed about a month ago. We were talking about how when he was a senior, he was playing against the number one high school quarterback in California, maybe the nation. He was going to go to in a playoff game. He was a sophomore, in fact. We played him, and I told him, I said, Greg, when you go out on that team on that field tonight, and I know this is maybe the first game he was really going to start. I said, in that split second before you play that first play, I want you to look over at their sideline, and I want you to remember you can out squat most of their guys, you can out clean them, and I know you can out snatch them. And I just want you to have fun playing that game. And he said, he'll tell you, he said, I did that, knocked down 2 passes, intercepted a ball that stopped a touchdown, had a great game. It was just that confidence that he had. So that's how, what we were trying to do is make sure those kids left us in the middle school so that when they went to high school, they weren't afraid to play. And I don't think, when I looked at it one time a few years ago, somebody talked about it, what was the effect? I don't think I had, maybe a handful over about a 20-year period from the middle school to that high school, that 20 to 25-year period where we had knee injuries. We were able, most of our kids made it through because of what we were doing in the middle school. We were just changing it. By the time they got there, they knew how to lift, and they were basically in pretty good shape. But that's what I think the La Sierra program was doing. If you look at the video, and I just think we've just made some huge mistakes by going away from those programs. And it seems to me, as I look around the last few years, that's where we want to go again. We seem to be a lot of people that want to go back to that. And I think we should, but we had to get past a mindset, and honestly, in California, if you look at the standards for physical education, they really look like somebody did a really good job of long-term development. The problem is, do we do it? Do we actually do it? I mean, do we actually, every kid come out of the first grade that's able to dribble a ball with both feet? Does every kid come out of the first grade able to dribble any kind of ball with both hands? I know they're coming into 6th and 7th grade and they couldn't do it. So everything that we see, I think, in academics, where we're trying to get them up to par. Well, we were doing the same thing athletic, physically. We were trying to get them up to par. And so we were always behind, and yet they always wanted to cut our programs to get those kids academically up to par. And understanding, I didn't understand it, because even before Ratty's book, I saw the correlation between kids being better physically and them doing academics. So to me, it's been a tough battle, because I'm going, why? And when I look at COVID right now, I honestly believe that 5 years from now, some research guy is going to tell us how we really blew this thing. He's going to talk about how our kids, we lost the scaffolding effect of a year in school, and we've been losing that scaffolding effect for physical education for years and years. And we need to go back, and you and I and Larry have talked this a long time, and I keep saying, hey, it's rigor and scaffolding. We have to use that educational terminology. And when you take a kid and you slowly moving up and getting better, don't just do drills for drills, do drills to teach, and make sure it's something that's going to affect what they're doing. And that's what we did. Our PE program had 10 to 15 minutes of dynamic warm-ups and physical stuff before they played any games every day. And we didn't play games every day. We only had game stuff every maybe 2 days. And we had a running day, and we had just, something like what they call CrossFit today, where we were doing a lot of just training at stations and stuff like that. And that's long. I don't know if that tells you everything you want to know, but that's kind of where I came from.
No, that's actually an excellent start and gives some perspective for where we're going to go next. So let's work our way across halfway across the country there, Larry, and kind of give us a little bit about your background, how you came up and got involved in all of this.
Well, to be really truthful, my life is not as exciting as Pat's and yours. Uh, I grew up in a little farm community in southeastern South Dakota. I'm a farm boy.
Hmm.
I'm even old enough. I went to a one-room school. Um,
You're
there
old.
were there were 6 of us in my entire class, and out of the 6, 5 of us still communicate. After uh, we started in the first grade, I think it was in 1944. So it's been a journey.
Hmm.
I went to a small high school. Um, I think I always wanted to be an athlete. Um, and my desire, I guess we all have a dream. I wanted to play football, all at about 100 and, oh, I don't know, maybe 155 pound, which is not huge in today's, even back then, standard. And I had a very serious injury in high school. And at that time, I had a scholarship uh, to the University of South Dakota in both football and track. And I wanted to play football more than track, so I decided that would be um, something I wanted to do, and I ended up with a very serious injury in football my freshman year, which also killed my scholarship in track. And back then, if you didn't perform, you lost your scholarship. So, long story short, my athletic career ended early, and I still wanted to stay with sport. So, along with this, my career ended up in teaching. I had a major in physical education, and my first job was in northern Minnesota. And I was a head swimming coach and an elementary PE teacher. I loved it. Except northern Minnesota, there are 4 seasons in this world, except northern Minnesota has about 8 months of winter. And at some point, uh, as beautiful of a surrounding environment it is, winter becomes excessively long. So we moved down to the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. My second job was that in a suburb in a southeastern suburb of St. Paul. Stayed there several years, and then I had the itching to try to maybe pursue a college job. And I was offered a job in the Nebraska system, but I had a friend tell me that there was a new suburb in the southwestern portion of Minneapolis called Burnsville that was um, expanding and growing suburb. Come and take an interview. Well, long story short, I stayed in Burnsville for 33 years. When I came to Burnsville, one of the most attractive parts of being hired in the district was their physical education program. The school board and the administration, every child had required physical education back then from first grade through 10th grade every day. And the most phenomenal part of all of this is that every elementary school, every junior high school, and the high school, every kid that was in attendance had physical education every day throughout the entire year. And I must say that the elementary, the junior high schools at that time, and the senior high, our staff would meet, all the staff in all areas would meet once a month. But at our local school, the physical education teachers, we had 13 full-time physical education teachers, 6 women and 7 men for 3 years. And our class size, a big class was about 18. And yeah, and we had the interesting thing about it is I have never seen so many educators so focused on doing a quality job. We didn't have all the scientific names that we do today, and all the verbiage and all the videos and all the seminars. But as I look back, we may not have had all the terms, but the kids back then, I thought, got a really quality job of being taught fundamental skills and emphasis on correct technique. And it was an amazing journey. I stayed at Metcalf Junior High from 1967 and retired in 2000. And when the junior high split, 6 of the 12 went to the other new junior high. The third junior high was built, I think, in the late 80s, and that had 6. So we've maintained 6 full-time physical education teachers, and every kid had physical education every day from 1967 to the year I retired in 2000, which I think is absolutely amazing. Our physical education curriculum was phenomenal. We covered aquatics and individual sports and team sports and, oh my God, lifetime sports. And I think everything you could imagine. Our 7th grade students had stayed with pretty fundamental course work and 8th grade review, but 9th grade had a lot of elective options that kids could take. And I'm to this day, I'm very proud to have been part of the development process and program. Pat and I have talked about it, and you have also, Rick, where we had some things that I can only imagine today. We had a variety of outdoor activities. One of activities is we taught trap shooting. We actually shot clay birds on our school grounds. I would carry 6 shotguns in my trunk of my car. I don't know how many cases of shells, but every kid had an opportunity to fire a shotgun 3 rounds every class period for 3 weeks. And that's like 15 days of activity. Can you imagine today how many SWAT teams would be surrounding the school grounds, and how fast I would be arrested and in jail? But we taught fly fishing and cross-country skiing. We had a snowmobile unit. We had kayaking. We had canoeing. We don't have mountains or rock climbing, but we built a wall. We just did a variety of things. And the most exciting part of all of it is it was a team effort. And none of our staff ever had to teach anything that they didn't want to. I mean, it was, and nobody had, well, I'm going to because I want to do this only. Every staff member had an opportunity to teach at any level, at any course they wanted. And as a result of that, we built a staff that nobody had an ego trip, and everybody was part of the process. And I think it just to listen to kids that came back, um, just listening to stories of graduates and picking up on the strength movement component. We always taught fundamental movement. Our plyos where we were we didn't do a lot of depth jumping. We did do some eccentric stuff and some concentric stuff and some reactive, but not crazy stuff. But the weight stuff, we started, I guess, in the late 1970s, and it was sort of you could do this. We had some equipment, but we didn't have a designated room. And as we started to talk about it as a staff, it's a need. We need to start. Well, at the junior high level, you don't have groups, team groups like you do at the high school, booster clubs, et cetera, et cetera. So our funds, you only get so much. So we started to say, well, how can we raise money? What can we do? And you can go with the pop sale and the candy sale, et cetera, et cetera. But we got thinking about, well, could we do community projects? And if we did community projects, who would we ask to do and what would we do? Well, we had a friend that was a high-ranking member with a VFW club, and they just bought this big building and they had this humongous parking lot. We said, what would you pay us if we swept this parking lot and sort of did a spring cleaning and a fall cleaning? Guy said, well, we'll give you, I think it was that time, like a couple of $1,000. Now, whoa, that's not too bad for a day's work. So we went to the kids and we said, how many of you would be willing to put in 4 or 5 hours? And this was just one of many projects. But we get 30, 40 kids that would volunteer. And the most interesting thing about this was kids started to develop ownership in the room. And what a awesome experience, because you never had to worry about, and then we, along with developing funds to buy equipment, etc., we also designated a room. And in 2 years, we supplied a lot of the equipment with just fundraising. And it was all volunteer on the part of the kids. And as I said before, I don't know if we ever, that was maybe one of the best things that we ever did. Now, I'm sure there'd be individuals that will say, well, we shouldn't have, I'll use the word prostituted the kids to earn the money. But at no time did we ever put pressure on kids. Hey, you've got to sign up to do this. They did this because they wanted to. And all of a sudden, it became part of their room. And I have never seen a group of individuals that respected and identified, and I'll use the word owned, the process like these kids did. I mean, and still to this day, and this goes back into the mid 80s, I run into individuals that I still stay in the area that I taught in, the suburb, and I still run into kids that you remember back in the 80s when we cleaned or when we did this, or we do projects for individual families, etc. And I think I have never seen an opportunity where kids owned and respected and developed a relationship. And it wasn't just the room, but it was part of the camaraderie of the kids and ownership and respect for the process of not only working to improve their own athletic abilities, but also ownership into something that they had earned. And I think a lot of programs that have these phenomenal facilities ought to always orient the kids that are coming in about how did this room get here? Because you are lucky enough to walk into something that is really nice and you didn't understand how it got to this point. So the journey of working with kids, working with parents, we had some awesome parents. And I think the ability to support a program and to reinforce what you're doing, it becomes athlete, parent, coach. Those three are just absolutely critical along the journey.
These are great stories, and it just, I keep thinking as we're talking here, you both were leaders in phenomenal physical education and athletic programs. What happened?
Well,
That's
let
such a
me
crazy
start
question.
with this. I think a pie is just so big. And if the three of us had the pie, we'd all have a third. But when a fourth jumps in, now all of a sudden that our piece gets a little smaller. And there are just so many pieces in the pie in some way, shape, or form. We in physical education could not convince the power brokers that we were as important as anyone else. And I think those of us that had to dig, scratch, claw, scream, holler, jump, shout, bang, and any other word that you could possibly think of, we had to go through that. And the generation that, or not a generation, maybe a generation, but the groups that came behind us never really understood how there were days I'd stand toe to toe with my principal and we'd yell at each other. And we may have even used several other descriptive words that I don't know if would work on this presentation. But the ownership, the commitment, the drive, desire, frustrations, and will, if you will, maybe that the group that inherited what we had to dig, scratch, and claw to get never really appreciated. Like if you walk into the weight room at our high school, kids have no idea what went into that room to get what they have. And if you haven't put some blood, sweat, and tears in something, it's a lot easier to think of it as less important than one that you have just busted your hump trying to get, earn, hold, and whatever. Now that's my 2 cents. Pat, you may have a completely different thought of that.
You mentioned fundraising. You have to look at things that you can do to get money. And like, for example, back in probably, God, I'd say back about late 80s or 90, kids were buying PE clothes and we could dress it. We made every kid get dressed. But the school didn't want, first of all, the school was selling them, but they didn't want to do it. So the first thing we said is, hey, we'll do it. And I'll tell you what, you don't understand, you have no clue how much money you can make if you start a physical education club or something and sell the PE clubs. Because, they're paid, right now, if you go to a school, I just walked through one school, they said the shirts were $10 and the PE shorts were $10. You're not making me paying $5 for that. So you're doubling your money. And so we did that, and we knew that probably, even though at the time there were Coke machines on our campus and they finally eliminated those, then they created the Gatorade machine, and then the Coke and Pepsi bought Gatorade and Powerade. So it just became another Coke, really, and we all knew, back in the, I don't know, actually, I had a college professor who was on the Gatorade study, for Florida. She graduated out of Ohio State. She was a PhD out of Ohio State, but we all knew back in those times when Gatorade came out, you had to cut it. You take that thing and pour 50% of it with water. So we knew this stuff was bad. So what we did is we just started selling water. You go down and buy a 6-pack of water, and kids would come in, and you're making twice what you made on water. So all of a sudden we had lots of money, and we were buying stuff. And like you said, Larry, there's 3 of them a piece. When you have some money, everybody wants part of the money. So the next thing you know, they decide they want, we could go out there and have like 8 lines of 5, like we had bigger classes. So maybe we had 8 lines of 5 or 6 where we had 40, 50, 60 kids, but I had 8 different colored basketballs. And so we were doing stuff, where they had about a 5-to-1, work rest ratio. And we were doing all these things with that. And that's unheard of, but then all of a sudden they decide, well, hey, you think you could help us buy some stuff for a basketball team? And literally when I got done, we were paying for a travel basketball team. We were paying for their uniforms. We were paying for their basketballs. We were paying for their transportation. And the transportation thing, I didn't even know we paid for it the first time, because they actually took it out of my thing. We had a guy that was a dean, and he actually took the money out of there without telling me. And the next year when I was the dean, because they got rid of some people, the principal that came in said, hey, are you going to pay for transportation again for the bus, for the basketball teams? I said, I didn't pay for transportation. He said, yes, you did. And he actually showed it to me. So somebody did something wrong. But, I didn't mind doing that because, we had a lot of money, and every year we would save some. And the funny thing about clothing manufacturers for PE, we found that if we got enough money so that we ordered the stuff in June, they gave us like 5-10% off the cost. So all of a sudden we're selling the stuff for the same price, but we're buying it for a lot less. So our goal was to try to keep $3,000 or $4,000, because we would literally buy $7,000 worth of PE clothes. So, but we were buying 4,000 of it by paying that up front. We got a big chunk of money off and bought more stuff. So we just kept doing that. And that's the hard thing on that one. When I had the last principal I had, like Gary said, you're going through battles. He was bad. And we all talked about that. But when I left, he went and gathered up all those PE clothes, took them down to the office. Now that stuff belonged to a club. That was a club account. He took it down to the office and sold it and kept the money. And that club lost. There was probably $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 worth of stuff, PE clothes, that we lost. That they just, I don't know what happened to money. I was gone. But the guy took it when I left because he had the power to do that, because I was the guy that he couldn't do anything to. So, I mean, and it's funny as it goes along, you look at stuff, and we never had those kind of that kind of a PE department. I mean, I fought probably the first 10 years that I taught. I would go into a PE department and say, well, are we going to do this? Well, I'm a basketball coach, or I'm a this coach. And we developed this thought process, in my opinion, that a lot of these guys thought they were just sport coaches, and they made them teach a class. So they didn't do a lot. And one of the things I said way back a long time ago, when PE started, we started losing ground in the 70s, in the 80s, I said, what the problem is those kids that got D's, C's and D's in PE because they weren't very good. And they look at those athletes that got A's, and they were working hard, and they decided they wouldn't become a PE teacher. They became a legislator. The next thing you know, they were cutting our PE programs. And that I didn't appreciate it. And then you started looking, I think the thing that really bothers me the most when we saw losing it is I read an article that was around 1980, and I think I got it out of the Athletic Journal or something. And it was talking about by 1975, that's not too long. You're thinking I got a high school in 68. By 1975, we were at a major deficit in this country compared to Eastern Europe. They were killing us in all the fitness categories. And then by 1990, got another article that said that we were worse in the 80s than we were in the 70s. And then by the year 2000, we were worse in the 90s than we were doing the 80s. So we literally spent better part of 40 years going downhill and not fixing the problem. And then there was a study actually where I live, right in Redlands. One of the doctors, I think, was in Redlands that was involved in the study that came out about 8 or 10 years ago, I think it was that long ago, where they said that the generation of children today will not live as long as their parents because of fitness and obesity and all these issues. And one of the things when they came out with that study, I said, what's wrong with this picture? Because at the same time that we came up with that, they said that the average baby boomer had elevated the longevity of life like 3 or 4 years. And I said, so the baby boomers who grew up in the 60s are looking back and say, I got to do something. And at the same time, the kids we got up, their longevity is going down. So there's something wrong with this picture. But we fight and we argue about it, but what do we got to do? And I think we need to go back, it's like, I'm Indian, and we talk about knowing our elders and listening to what the elders knew. I always say if there's that one person I could go back and talk to one more time. My grandmother died 20 years ago, and I have so many questions for her in the last 20 years. And I think that what you're doing with Larry and I think is good, because you need to go back to the guys that did it, and literally ask them, how did you do this? What did you do? And what was the reason you did it? And that was it. And like I say, because for me, it was kind of easy, because by the time I went to the middle school, nobody cared about the middle school. So I walked in, and the first thing I did is I looked at the lady I was going to teach with, and I said, hey, I've been here for 3 or 4 years as a football coach. I'm coming here, kind of that's where they send you when you decide you're going to do something else. And I said, so are we teaching physical education, or are we just throwing the ball out? And she literally looked at me and said, oh my God, my prayers have been answered. Because the guy she had before ended up being the basketball coach at the high school. All he did is roll the ball out every day. So all of a sudden we started teaching, and then we just started developing back in the 80s. And I said, well, this is what we did in 1965. She's about probably 7 or 8 years older than I am. And so she went to Arizona State, and they had a really good PE program at Arizona State. So she said, yeah, let's do that. And so we just did it. We just did it. We didn't listen. We were able to. I mean, the first time, you talk about silly thing, we're 200, 300 yards away from an office. And when they had walkie-talkies, all these people were walking around with walkie-talkies, these campus supervisors and all this other stuff. Well, I had a kid break his leg out on the field. I had to send a 7th grader all the way to the office to find somebody to get some help. We had no cell phones. So one of the first things, we took some of that money and bought our walkie-talkies so we could talk to the office if we had a problem. They took a big, huge part of our field and made a building out of it. So they made this other field down at the other end. So I had this huge track. It wasn't really a track. It was just a dirt path. There was probably, half a mile. So we started running that and doing that. And then this field they built, they left a hill. So all of a sudden we said, hey, let's just run up the hill. So because when you're running up a hill, you got to get greater strides, because other than that, you're going to fall down. You got to pick up your feet. So we started doing that stuff. Somebody told me one time I wanted sand volleyball coats. They said, well, we can't do that because we can't get the sand. I said, what if I get you the sand for free? You can't do that. I said, yeah, I can. Called up this guy that I knew, and he worked with the cement company, with this big, huge concrete company. And I said, so you're telling me I can do this if I get the sand? And they go, yeah. So we smoothed out the ground, and hey, here come these trucks, and they just dumped the sand. And the rest of them were going, well, how'd you do that? I said, I asked somebody, and they said they could, and they said they would. It's amazing how much people will do. Like Larry said, the guy said they give them a couple $1,000 to sweep the thing, but that's kids, and people care about kids, and there's an old thing Magic Johnson said about kids. It said, all kids need is someone that cares about them. Or you listen to Frosty Western, things that Western sound about, people don't care how much they know till they know how much you care. And I think that's where kids are. And I think, we think kids are different. They're not. They're not. Seventh graders do the same silly things they did in seventh grade 25 years ago. The only problem is they don't have people who care for them. And I think that for me, and I'm sure Larry, the same thing, we talked about kids he's had in the last few years. Some of them you just got to do. You got to do what you got to do. I bought a lot of shoes, bought a lot of PE clothes. My tax lady used to tell me, why do you coach? You spend more money than you make. The old guys that say they made a nickel an hour, I probably cost me over 24 30 cents an hour to do the coaching. But what are you going to do? You're going to tell a kid to have a team meal, he doesn't have any money, he's not going to eat? No, you let him eat, you pay for it. Kid, what are you going to do? Kid's got no shoes. You want him to come to PE and he's got no shoes. You want him to play a sport, he's got no shoes. What do? You buy shoes, or you find somebody that will. And even today, you will find that like my son's football team, their running back, the first couple of games, the head coach, when he was in high school, the head coach asked me to help retape him at halftime. So I took the tape off his shoe, and literally the whole bottom of the shoe came off. I looked at the coach, he says, we don't have any money. And I told my son that I taped it back together. He played the game. I told my son, you tell Deshaun to meet us at BJ Sporting Good tomorrow at 12 o'clock after practice. He said, why? I said, just tell him to be there. And I bought the kid a new pair of shoes. This kid was a hell of a running back. He lived part of his high school years in his car. Lived in a car, so he didn't have that. So, but we had money to do things. Like used to keep, kids throw stuff away if they walk out the door. Really good shoes. I kept shoes. I kept old shorts. Hey, wash machine. Kid doesn't have something, I gave it to him. You don't have it, I give it to you. And you just, when you do that for them, you'd be amazed what they'll do. I used to have a thing that before they did all this other stuff, and made us do things. We used to tell kids, if you want to get an A, and these are middle school kids, you want to get an A, you got to run a mile somewhere between 7 and 8 minutes. I had kids running 6-minute miles. I had girls having to run a mile between 8 and 9 minutes. I had girls running 7 and 8 minute miles. Only because we said it was important. And then for all those tests we had, we bought shirts. And then you have kids like, and sometimes it was like, I gave a little girl who was a straight A student, and she was overweight. She couldn't walk a 20-minute mile when we started. But at the end of the year, I gave her an award for improvement because she could jog a 12-minute mile. She couldn't walk a 20-minute mile. She was a straight A student, but she couldn't do that. So every one of those tests, we had a first, second, and third place for. When you look at that La Sierra program, the further you moved up the ladder, you got a different pair of shorts and stuff like that. In my high school, they had the gold group, the green group, and the white group. And all it was is it was a 50-point test. If you got 41 or above, you were in the gold. If you got 31 or to 40, you were in the green. And if you got below 30, you were in the white. And that test was given every quarter. And every quarter you could move. And what group you were in, it depended how many days you were doing fitness. Well, we instituted stuff like that into our program, in the 80s. And, it worked. kids wanted to do things, they wanted to get better. We gave them rewards, shirts and stuff. And, you can wear that shirt to PE because you got that shirt. And hey, we had kids wearing those things to PE and it became a badge of honor, a pride thing. And I think that's something that you can do. And I don't know that we do that anymore. I think we give them a lot, but we don't make them earn a lot.
Good, Larry.
I want to go back 1 minute. You talked about where we are today. Our junior high program, grades 7, 8, and 9, I told you every kid had physical education every day. And I will say that the 6 physical education teachers that was in our school and the other schools, we worked hard to keep that. One of the deteriorations that we saw was when up until I think it was 81, 82, 83, I can't remember exactly, but somehow, way, shape, or form, every school district in the United States, I would imagine, has gone through deficit spending or whatever word you want to call it. So they started to cut programs. And obviously, physical education was one of the first. The tragic with that is that we used to have a elementary physical education teacher in every building. Pretty soon it went 1 every 2 buildings. And then once the dominoes start to fall, it's easier to have them continue to fall. So pretty soon, elementary teachers were now 1 every 3. And pretty soon, and I think we had 8 or 10, I can't remember the number right now. But I think at the junior high level in the late 80s, we started to see the effect of what happens when fundamentals aren't taught. And since that, it became not only, I'll use the word, an amputation and a hemorrhage. And I think that's where we are today, is the programs have been so cut and so devastated. And it's been, and I think either school boards or powers to be have said, well, they'll pick it up in youth athletics. And the problem is, and God help them, because parents volunteer, and if there weren't volunteers, there probably wouldn't be programs. I don't know. But we've created our own monster, because a lot of the youth coaches are parents who may have played some time in their high school career, but probably never went beyond that. And we have, I think there are 6 terms that parents, athletes, and coaches and youth boards really need to truly, totally understand. And there are sports skills. And if I handed you I'm just using an example of a baseball. You could catch it, throw it, or strike it, or hit it, or whatever you want it. That's a sport skill. But if you separated the sport skill from movement skill, you've created a whole new aspect of what helps that athlete become a better athlete. And I think a lot of youth coaches and parents, and perhaps even sport coaches, get so convinced, oh, I got to teach you how to hit, as an example in baseball. And I'm not picking on baseball, but a sport coach thinks, well, you've got to be able to hit, throw, catch, or you pick the sport. And they do not teach a kid how to move properly. And as a result, there's been, and we've gotten this over sports specialization has just become a monster, just a cancer that has just destroyed a lot of programs and kids. and we can't seem to separate the important elements, and we tend to try to compress time. And sport coaches get involved in it, and so do athletes, and so do parents. And I want my kid to be ready for a professional sport and a professional career, and they're no more prepared for that than they are able to fly. And we and what has happened is there's been such a massive void in physical education. And in physical education just becomes part of the curriculum. But if you took any other subject, a math, science, social studies, you name it, music, whatever, and you cut the program as much as physical education programs have been cut, and see what would happen. And
Good dad, I have to say some of that.
and we have tried to substitute youth sports as a viable alternative, and it hasn't happened. We've become so convinced we overplay and undertrain. And we've burned kids out. We have done our very best to dumb down athletics. And we get the group of people, well, everyone should be able to compete and whatever. And it's not about that. I can take a kid that will never, ever play a professional sport or a high school sport or a college sport. And that kid should have the same right to understand how to move as well as any other kid. And we tend to think, well, if I just teach them all this proper movement, it's only for athletes. No, it's for anyone. And we tend to over exaggerate what we do. So much of it is just basic fundamentals. How do you teach a kid how to start and stop and change direction and jump and land? And we have a lot of coaches, we have a lot of PE teachers that I listen to talk about programs and how they're doing. And I truly don't think they know what they're doing. They talk the talk, but they don't really teach the subject or teach the component of the sport or the movement, if you will. And they don't correct. Now, that's my opinion, but I think there is just basic fundamentals that many of them don't understand, along with parents and sport coaches. And it doesn't have to be overly complicated. If a 10-year-old or a 6-year-old can't understand what you're trying to say, then you better go back and rephase it so they can.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Pat, what did you have?
Another thing, like Larry said, there's lack of consistency too. Like Larry said that, that we went from one per building to one for every 2 buildings to one for every 3. I can give you examples of 2 districts in California. The one I was in, one of my wife was in. When my wife was in, they had 3 or 4 PE teachers at the elementary school. In mine, we had 1 PE teacher for 4 elementary schools, and it wasn't happening. And then we lost track of this being important. I had a superintendent. As the head of my department, I had a really great opportunity. I had the opportunity to see the test scores from 5th grade, 7th grade, and 9th grade, because they just kind of set them out there as department heads got them. So one year I started just keeping track of 5th graders as we got them to 7th graders, and then what happened to them in the 9th grade. And like I had 3 groups I found that was really kind of interest over about 7 or 8 year period. I found a group of kids that were really low in the 5th grade And we did a really good job of raising them in the 7th grade, and their academics were coming up. Then I found a group that was really good in the 5th grade. They were about average in the 5th grade. And we raised those guys in the 7th grade. And about 8 or 10 of those guys took algebra in the 8th grade. Well, the interesting thing was the one I had one year, I had a group of kids who were really good in the 5th grade. We raised them in the 7th grade. And those guys were taking geometry in the 8th grade. And when this superintendent asked me one time, well, I said, we improve your academics. And she said, that's not true. And, I showed her Gene Blade stuff and all of, Ratty's stuff. And I said, but here's mine. I said, these are our kids in our district. And this is what I found. And it's like, they don't want to know how to do that. They don't want to hear about it. And then the other thing is, about 25, 30 years ago in California, if you didn't have a PE teacher, then the elementary school teacher had to teach PE. Well, how many elementary school teachers want to do that? But there was a clause in the state education law that said, if you are going to require an elementary school teacher to teach physical education, then you had to train them how to teach physical education, because most of the time they had maybe one class. So now you have to train them to teach physical education. Well, they got rid of that law. They wiped that out. So we consistently, as Larry said, we downgraded our programs, and then we decided that the sports were going to make them up. You don't put your kid in sport to get in shape. You get your kid in shape to play the sport, and we did just the opposite. So as we did that, as Larry said, you started to see the rise of injuries. And now all of a sudden you're seeing, one of the best orthopedics in the country, the guy down in Atlanta, you look at his website and said, we got to stop the insanity. I'm doing too many Tommy John and ACL injuries on 15-year-olds. This is ridiculous. But, and he makes his money doing that. And he's saying, stop it. He's becoming a millionaire fixing this. And we're not doing that. And we're wondering why. And then, like Larry said, every kid, I've always wanted my kids to be able, and it's funny, I had one come to me just recently about this. I wanted them to say, I'm 25 years old. I got to get in shape. What do I got to do? What did Coach Cullen-Carroll say? He said, go out and run a telephone pole to a telephone pole and walk a telephone to a telephone pole. He said to take 20 minutes and go as far as you can in 10 and come back, and then keep doing that. And then eventually you're going to go further and further and further. All we were teaching them is to slowly move up, and they still do that. I have the guy that was doing concussion protocol on our football team, the high school, came to me. I saw him a couple of years ago. He goes, hey, coach, I want to let you know that I still do that snatch and clean. He's like in his 40s. He said, I still do that snatch and clean and jerk, but I don't do it with a bar. I do it with a kettlebell. Works for me, Terry. I don't care. You're still doing what we taught you to do back at that time, and they still have an appreciation of that. And right now, that's one of the things I told my son. And, it's amazing how many kids want to learn. We had a kid when I saw this kid at the high school, I substitute, they had a little bit of a strike, and this kid walks in. Have you ever seen the movie The Blind Side? This is the Blind Side guy. This guy's like 6'3", 300 pounds, and he's 15. He's a freshman. I'm going, who is that? But they couldn't keep him in football, and he got in a lot of trouble. And he was having problems. His father's like 75 years old. So they decided to bring in this new coach. And seriously, this kid's like a junior. This is his question to my son. Did they hire just coordinators, or did they hire position coaches? And most people don't understand why that's important, because this kid wants to learn to play the game. And for the 2 years he's been there, they've had nobody that wants to teach him to play the game. They would just go out and run plays. He wants to learn to play the game. So now he wants to be there. And, you get them that kind of stuff. They don't all have to play. They don't have to all be starters. They're not going to, but you give them a reason to want to be on the team. What they're learning something. They did a study way back in the 90s, and I think Champion or something did it. And they asked the questions on why kids play sports. And you know, what's interesting thing is they asked the kids, and they came out with a list of answers, 1 to 10. Then they asked the coaches why they thought kids played sports. You know, what's scary is the coaches were absolutely the opposite of the kids. The coaches was about winning. The kid was about belonging to something. The kid was about learning something. They were just, or by the 90s, our coaches had lost the real concept of why the kids were there, because they were just there to win. And we made, we started cutting kids. I don't think anybody really got, the only guy got cut off my high school football team, we cut him. Because we made a decision, we weren't going to do anything stupid during the season, and 2 guys did. And we got together on a Saturday morning and we had a meeting, and we told the coaches, these guys aren't going to play anymore, because they didn't follow the rule that we all set, because we had a pride in who we are. And I think that that's something that we have to get back. And we have to understand that this stuff really has a lot to do with academics. So, what does the brain feed on? It's oxygen. Well, if you're in better shape, the brain might work. You might not fall asleep. Most people do not realize the importance of first period PE. First period. You're out there, you're doing things, you're getting active, you're moving around, you're doing things that they have to cognitively think about. Then they go to class and they do better. The research that I think it was Gene Blades found is, or maybe Ratty, one of them, is they found that like your math and reading scores should go greater if you have a first period PE as opposed to having a PE class later on during the day. But we talk about using the research. Well, we didn't have research 25, 30 years ago on this stuff. And we thought about it, but now we have the research, and we have these people that tell us, well, find the research that proves that. You go prove it to them and they still cut your program. And it's not working. And we see that. And if we don't change it, multi-billion-dollar industry. We have, Larry, 40 years ago, how many diabetics did you have on campus? How many guys were shooting diabetics? They were using a hypodermic to shoot for insulin. Hardly any. Now they're everywhere. They're everywhere. We have asthma issues. We have inhalers. We have all these things that we have to deal with that are, a lot of them are physically based. And our kids are just physically out of shape, and we're seeing the negative ramifications of that. You can't even, the military, one of the number one guy told me, probably back when you and I first got together, Rick and Larry, years ago, and these guys were recruiters, they said that the number one injury rate in the military was boot camp. They are not ready to do anything. If you go drive around and look at recruiting stations, a lot of the recruiters have become personal trainers. They're training them to be able to get into boot camp. And here's another really interesting aspect. There was a Marine guy that told me this, 20-year Marine, Master Gunny. He said, it's interesting. I said, what do you do with a guy that doesn't make it? He goes, well, if you go down to MCRD in San Diego, every Friday, somebody graduates. They have a whole group of guys that graduate. So I got a guy that's not ready to graduate. I can take him and take him over to this guy and say, hey, look, this guy's not ready, but in 3 weeks he will be. So I can move him over here. And then, instead of just cutting him loose, they work with the guy. And I said, why aren't we doing that in education? Why aren't we doing that same thing? Instead of just moving them on, why don't we just continue to do the things we are supposed to do? And I don't know why. I just don't get it. I don't understand.
So that actually brings up a really good point too. I think as we're kind of now focusing the conversation a little bit about long-term athletic development, and you two are pioneers in this area of bringing the information to everybody in the US, especially for what this can do. And you've really, I think, given a great history of the disconnect that occurred, why it occurred, and what that's actually led to. But for listeners and those who are in the field and want to make a difference, what are the recommendations you have now moving forward of what we should be able to do based on what you've seen? Where do we go from here?
Well, I personally think everything has to start at the local level. And in that I'll say is probably what tools are available. Who are the tools? Who are the people that are associated with kids? And whether it be from just a physical education standpoint, or whether it be from athletics or whatever involvement, and what kind of pathway is needed, and how long. If you go back to studies, what is it? Less than 5% go on and play at a professional or a college level. So 95% or 95 out of 100 athletes, whether it be girls or boys or combined or whatever, they're going to terminate their high school career at 12th grade in sport. So you've got I would say a 12-year window somewhere in that vicinity. So developing I guess communications, I'm not sure physical education certainly is a vital element in the journey, but putting together a group of individuals at the elementary, at the middle school, at the high school, if you could, and to me, it would make sense to use the school, but especially coaches and I think running school in service programs, and just teaching coaches how to teach, how to teach correct movement. And it doesn't have to, and teaching the coach to develop a coach's eye. What are you looking for when you see movement? Whether it be in a squat rack or on a platform or on a field or a court, a diamond, what's it look like? What's a jump supposed to be involved? And looking at the what Vern Gambetta uses the term PAL, posture, arms, and legs. So you cut down all the variables out there and you start to focus on what do the arm movements look like? What do the leg movements look like? What's the position of the trunk? And then off of that, teaching coaches where's the base of support? Where's the center of mass? What's the line of force? And then after you teach these fundamental parts, then you can start to teach the linear, the lateral, the diagonal, the vertical components of movement. And then after that is taught and there is some understanding, then you can start to get into the multiple movements of deceleration, and change of direction and re-acceleration and some of the transitional movements that are involved in those. And it takes time. And I think the biggest thing is everything's broken down into basics. The fundamentals, if you don't have sound fundamentals as a coach on how to teach, correct, reinforce, then it's time to go back and learn these fundamentals so that you can teach. And and I think we get cute with how advanced, but everything is, we have 26 letters in the English alphabet, and look what we can do with words. We have 10 numbers. Look what we can do with math. We have 7 major musical chords. Look what we can do with music. We have 7 colors. Look what artists can do with those 7. So everything comes back to basics. If you don't have the basics, you don't have anything except frustration. And it takes time. We tend to forget that when you learned how to move, your first movements were crawl. And once you could crawl, you could stand. And once you could stand, you could maybe walk. But in that journey, that was your journey. When you learned the alphabet and you learned the numbers, you didn't learn that in a short period of time. Nobody does. It takes time. Movement is the same. It takes time. And and a constant correction to help with movement. You don't have to browbeat a kid and you don't have to whatever, but you can reinforce what is correct. And
One of the
that's
first books, go ahead.
that's my thought on that.
One of the first books that Vern Gambetta told me, the first time I met Vern Gambetta, he mentioned a book called Smart Moves, Why Learning It Just Isn't in the Head. I think everybody ought to read that book. I read it I think it was the 1985 Chicago Bears Super Bowl when they were ahead about 40-0 at halftime. I read the whole book in the second half. But the other thing, and Larry mentioned it earlier, they had 13 PE teachers. They had 13 physical education teachers, not 13 coaches who taught PE. They had 13 physical education teachers.
Right.
When I just interviewed for some guys at a school district for a football coach, they wanted a football coach who could teach PE. They didn't want a PE teacher who could coach football. We've taken that emphasis and turned it around. And if in the 70s, that's when it became I coach football. I just make me teach PE. My football coaches, I would say that of probably 7 or 8 gentlemen who I had throughout my high school and lower division and upper division, I don't think 2 of them were PE teachers. The rest of them were, business education, English, math, these kinds of things. So we've gotten to this thing where we've taken away physical education. When I went to your conference back on the East Coast, I really had a great time. I really had a good time talking to some of those kids. Some of those kids' major frustrations were they taught me what to do, but nobody will let me do it. And when you're a first or second year teacher in a school district, you buck the system, you're going to be gone. I was old enough and been in the system long enough that they couldn't stop me. It would take them 5 years to fire me, so it wasn't worth it. And I wasn't hurting anybody's feelings anyway. And the kids were getting better. So why not? And I think that's a major emphasis. If you go back and look at that La Sierra program, all those guys were physical education teachers. They had pride in what they were doing, and it was about teaching physical education. And I think that, in my opinion, we've taken that out of there. I'm not sure that the kids, some of them know what to do, they're just not allowed to do. But in some of the programs, they've taken up some of the right things. One of the places in Cal State, California State College and University System, there isn't a physical education program. There's kinesiology. A couple of them have kinesiology with pedagogies or exercise science, but there's not a physical education program. One of the places I teach a course with strength training, the guy, he said that, we found out that we have a problem. We've gotten so much into kinesiology, we stopped teaching people how to teach movement. So he said they're reversing their program now, and they're graduating guys to teach physical education that don't know how to teach movement. We had the guys, I think you met them, Larry, the guys from New Zealand were here, I don't know how many years ago.
Yeah.
And we had them at Cal State Fullerton, and they were just looking at programs and stuff. And we spent a day with them. I got to spend a day with them. Then they went to the NSCA conference. We spent a couple more days with them. And, they were talking about maybe the thing to do is we're going to go back to New Zealand. If we can, we're going to try to eliminate physical education and call it movement development. Where we're actually teaching kids how to move correctly rather than calling it physical education, which is kind of a broad standard of what people might want to think. We're going to name it exactly what we're going to call it. It's movement development. Because, one of the things in Smart Moves, the lady Larry talked about crawling. Well, if you can't crawl, you can't walk. we had a discussion a few years ago, and I said, is the squat a fundamental movement pattern or a functional movement pattern? And you had said, Rick, it was listed on the functional movement pattern scale. But the thing about it is, have you ever seen a kid get up and walk without squatting? So it's really fundamental. They get up and they take a step, and if they can't walk, they squat. And they do that so they can develop hip and, strengthen their hips and stuff like that, so they can continue to walk. So it's very basic fundamental, and we're not teaching that. And now all of a sudden you get kids that don't do that, and you go back and you find that kids don't squat, and then all of a sudden we have problems. They have ankle mobility issues, they have knee mobility, hip mobilities. Those kids last night, my son said, one of the first things he's seen, he says, there's a lot of really tight hip flexors. He's just been sitting around. And so they've got to be really careful. Otherwise, they're going to blow some stuff up, So, and that's just kids that have been sitting around for a year. And of those kids, how many of them they're just now in my district trying to do something I said we needed to do 30 years ago. We need to get together every year and several times a year with the elementary people, with the middle school people and high school people. We need to look at the elementary people and say, look, I'd like them to know these things when they get to middle school. And then look at the middle school kids and say, what do we want them to know when they get to high school? It doesn't matter how much they can do a squat with. It's just whether they can do a squat correctly. Because if you can't do a body weight squat walking into high school in the 9th grade, why in God's name are you putting a bar on that kid's back? It's just a recipe for disaster. So I think that we need to we teach them. There's some really good schools out there teaching how to teach physical education, but we're not letting them teach physical education. You got to do this, you got to do that. Then we got to start hiring physical education teachers rather than coaches who teach PE. Nothing against coaches. I was a coach who taught PE too. But I think that I did PE right. Physical education was extremely important to me because I wasn't very good. And it wasn't until I went to a Catholic school, never had a PE teacher in the first 8 years of school. So when I got to the high school, all I did was go, and I wasn't a very good athlete. So I never played on really good teams. And I came from, my parents were divorced when I was 9. Had an aneurysm, almost died. So then they're scared to let me do anything. So I didn't have a lot. So when I found somebody that could teach me something, that guy meant a lot to me. That guy that took me into the weight room the first time when I was 14 years old in 9th grade, one of the greatest coaches I ever had. And he was not a physical education teacher. He was my social studies teacher. He just coached also. And he said, this is what you need to do. So I think we need to lobby. We need to lobby a lot. And we need to start hiring the physical education people, not just coaches. Because, and I don't, and like Larry said, I don't take anything with those parents. Those parents are so important. But I think Vern talked about it, and Jimmy Ratcliffe a few years back, and they're saying, you know what? Those people aren't physical education teachers. They're not high-level coaches. They're just parents who are coaching little. We need to go into those organizations and teach dynamic warm-ups. Spend some time with those guys so they'll do that. I always said, as an athletic, if I was an athletic director, and I told these people when I took this thing over the last year, and I met with them. If I was the athletic director, I would make a standard mandated dynamic warm-up. And I don't care what sport you play. I don't care if you're the swimming team, the water polo team, the track team, the baseball team. I would make this dynamic warm-up that's going to take about 15 to 20 minutes. And you're going to do this every day. And I'm going to go around and watch and see if you do that. And if you don't, then we're going to have a discussion, because those kids have to be ready to play. And how are we going to do that if we're not continuing to teach motion and mobility? Teach the product, not, teach the process, not the product. They're not all there. And it takes time. They did 2 studies with the USOC. It takes 11 years to create an Olympic athlete. What makes you think your 13-year-old going 10-0 in baseball it makes him now a professional athlete. You cannot do that. You know, my nephew is 6'3". My wife's brother called me. He says, "Pat, I got to talk to you about John. He's 14. He's just going to turn 15. Turned 15 about 3 months ago. 6'3", weighed 165 pounds. So now he's 6'3" or 6'2". Now he's 6'3", going on 6'4", weighs 180. He's 15. He said he has not had he has 95-mile-an-hour bat speed. He has a 27-inch vertical, but he's not real mobile. He's growing." And I said, "Hey, we'll work with him on this, and we're not going to be in a hurry." He's just reaching that point, what, you know, peak height velocity or testosterone, whatever you want to use the terminology on the thing. I said, 4 years from now, I don't know what he's going to look like. He might be 6'6" and weigh 240, and he may not be a baseball player, or he may be just a first baseman hitting home runs out of the park, or he may be a tight end in football. I don't know. He's got a daughter that he adopted. She's they went over to China and they brought her home. She's got 4'8". She's not even 5 foot tall. She's 12 years old. She's got a 17-inch vertical, and she likes running cross country. I said, "Well, honestly, Eddie, you might have her in the wrong sport. I don't know, but you know, she's only 12, but a 17-inch vertical on a 4 foot, 7 or 8 inch Chinese girl that's 12 years old is a hell of a vertical, and I'm not sure where he's going to end, but we can't force kids into sport. You let them play everything. They're supposed to figure it out. You don't figure it out as a coach or a parent. Let them, but parents don't know that. They've got the dream. They want their kid to be a professional baseball player. But what they say this year, 106 players, I think they did a breakdown of the Super Bowl. There was like 1 or 2 that just played football. Most of them were multiple sport athletes. Tom Brady was not good enough. He was too slow to play pro football, but he's played in 10 Super Bowls and won, what, 6, 7, whatever it was. You don't know, you don't know what you're going to play, and you got to give them the opportunity. I mean, what's the name? The kid from the Chiefs, that guy threw 90-mile-an-hour fastballs in high school as a baseball player. The kid that played for, the New York Giants, he went to a little bitty school in Northern Cal. That's why he ended up in North Dakota. In Wyoming, because he went to a very small school and played 3 sports. He was like the biggest guy on the basketball team. It's a little farm community. And, so he ended up being in the NFL, but if he would have just played basketball, he wouldn't be in the NBA, but that's how he ended up there. And so we need to just let those kids develop over a long period of time and figure out what they can do. I can name probably 3 or 4 kids that I had in Banning that were basketball and football guys that if I was going to really had control over their life, I'd have made them decathlon guys, because they ended up being about 6'2", 6'3", 190, 210. Great athletes, played football in college, played a little basketball, but man, they could have been decathlon guys, but nobody steered them in that direction because they're too busy trying to steer them in one direction, and we can't do that.
No. You guys have brought up some really excellent points here, going all the way back from like how you came up and where we are to what we can do moving forward. And we're all certainly in agreement with how do we get those fundamental movement skills back to our kids. So I'm hoping that we could have another conversation to continue this talk about what we need to do, how we're going to implement that. How do we actually get physical educators who coach rather than coaches who are teaching PE? Because I know that's a huge movement in physical education as well, right? So they had to go back and actually say, we're going to focus on physical education and not sports. So they kind of took that out for a period of time too. So I think the solution part of where do we go next would be an exciting next conversation that we could have. We try to be wary of people's time. So we're going to end today's conversation, and I really appreciate you both being here with us today, and just wanted to thank you both for your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience, and your willingness to share with everybody where you've been and what's been going on. So look forward to a future conversation with you both too.
Yep. Thank you very much for
Well,
having.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. Appreciate that. Let me go.
Take care.